You're listening to episode 31 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Dr. Peter Strong speaks with us about mindfulness meditation therapy and his new book, The Path of Mindfulness Meditation. Before we get started with today's interview, I wanted to say thank you to Josh, Stanford, and others who have gone out to the website in the past week or two and taken the time to click on Contact. Reading emails from listeners who are getting something positive out of this podcast, out of finding a like-minded community of people who share our secular approach, is what makes this effort worthwhile. I also wanted to say welcome to the many people who have joined us on the Facebook fan page in the past few weeks. It's been terrific to have you join in the discussions, and thank you for your energy and interest. This is about you, for you, and I'm very grateful to have you here. Welcome to the Secular Buddhist community. I would also like to mention we have a growing list of meetup groups specifically for secular Buddhism, the newest being the Cambridge Secular Buddhists in Cambridge, Massachusetts. If you're out that way, please consider joining the group and supporting them in their meetings. You can find a link to them and others on the webpage for the Secular Buddhist podcast, www.thesecularbuddhist.com, under Resources Practice Centers. Moving on to our interview for today, Peter Strong, Ph.D., is a scientist and Buddhist psychotherapist based in Boulder, Colorado, who specializes in the study of mindfulness and its application in mindfulness psychotherapy. He trained in the U.S. and the U.K. and developed the methods of mindfulness meditation therapy and the use of experiential imagery-based psychotherapy. He uses mindfulness-based psychotherapy for individuals to treat anxiety, depression, phobias, grief, and post-traumatic stress. He teaches mindfulness techniques to help couples overcome habitual patterns of reactivity that cause interpersonal conflict. Peter also offers teaching seminars to groups and companies with an employee wellness program and interest in stress management. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice Colorado Bulldog in honor of our guest living in Colorado. The recipe is on the webpage for this episode. And I'm here with Dr. Peter Strong. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So what I wanted to do is chat for a bit with the listeners. One of the books that I have on the Resources Buddhism page is a book called The Path of Mindfulness Meditation, which is written by Dr. Strong, who's our guest today. And Peter, this is a book that came out this year, correct?
That's right. It came out in February.
So if we could start with telling us a little bit about your background and how you first encountered Buddhism and meditation.
Well, that's an interesting story that could be shortened into something like the Lawrence of Arabia, really. But my family, and particularly my father, has a history of interest in self-development and things like positive thinking and so on, which were, of course, a big thing in the 50s and 60s. And that's kind of where it started, this idea that we can essentially shape our own futures, our own lives, And that left a very deep impression on me. I grew up in England, as you can probably tell from my accent.
I might have guessed. Didn't sound like a standard Boulder, Colorado accent, no.
So I guess it kind of began taking some of my parents' ideas when I went to the University of Edinburgh in the 70s, the beginning of the 70s. There was quite an interesting program going on there looking at the physiology of mindfulness, which I got involved with and did some research there. But I think one of the most interesting things that happened during that time in Edinburgh is that the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi of the Transcendental Meditation lineage of meditation came and gave a talk in a hall there in Edinburgh. And this was just wonderful, so that's how I began my meditation experience in a formal context, was starting TM, as most other people probably did as well in those days. But one of the things that he said in his presentation to this audience was on the power of being, this concept that we call being, and which now is, the term presence is beginning to become very prominent with people like Eckhart Tolle, and many others too. And they're all pointing at this fascinating aspect of the mind, something that's much bigger than just the contents, just the problems of everyday life, the 10,000 sorrows and the 10,000 joys that preoccupy us all the time. So it's pointing to this larger dimension that we can call being or presence or just pure awareness, pure consciousness from a more Buddhist perspective. So that kind of stayed with me for a long time. And then after university and teaching for a while, I did what all Englishmen do, and that is they buy themselves a very old car and they head off to the desert. And so I tried to cross the Sahara Desert with a 1954 Land Rover, and of course it didn't work out too well. It broke down. So there I am in the middle of a desert, and this is the Lawrence of Arabia bit, and completely alone, completely stripped of all familiarity, all of those things that kept me secure as a typical English young man would be. So in this tremendous emptiness of the deserts, I basically had a nervous breakdown. I began to see the tremendous vulnerability of who I thought I was. And began to see that who I thought I was really not going to take me through life very far. It was too fragile. So in any case, after getting out of the desert, I took up a position teaching in the desert, in a desert school in Nigeria. And there I was faced with the same racking aloneness and panic and anxiety and sort of general angst. But I was now armed with some of my favorite books at that time, which was a number of books by Krishnamurti and a book by this Thai Buddhist monk called Theravamsa, called The Way of Non-Attachment. It's a wonderful book. And well worth reading for those interested in a non-secular approach to Buddhism. And through this, I began to get more and more in touch with this concept of being, and started basically, since I had nothing else to do in this remote school in Nigeria, besides teaching the rest of the time, I was just left alone And this was the chance to learn about meditation. So I spent a good part of a year developing the sense of how to relate to my own suffering, which is, of course, the purpose of meditation. I would say, I had some kind of breakthrough in that process, or something got established in there that was starting to clarify and crystallize. And then, of course, as the greater powers that be, if there are such things, I ended up in Boulder, Thanks to the universe for such questions about the spirit. And then I started to discover the teachings of Joseph Goldstein and Jack Cornfield and all these wonderful characters of the insight meditation tradition. Continued to grow and crystallize this process, and I became a mindfulness-based therapist, which I'm still practicing as a therapist and teacher. As I was working with clients, helping them work with their suffering in the same kind of way, I began to get more concrete understanding of the nature of mindfulness and how it could be used. And then eventually I went back to the UK for a while to visit my parents, and take a teaching position there. And during that time, I thought, right, I'm going to write all this up, all these experiences about the nature of mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. And that's the beginning of the book.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned in the emails that we had exchanged, you really self-identify as an atheist. And one of the things that I always am challenged with identifying as a secular Buddhist, and I'm very open about being an atheist myself, is how does that work exactly? Question that people present. And so how do you, when you identify as an atheist, explain being a non-religious meditator to people when that question arises?
It's a good question, and this is a perennial question, and one in which we must all take on this question and study it and contemplate it and really, really make it a part of our life, because it's so important. It's really actually from a Buddhist perspective, and particularly from the early Theravadan tradition, which is kind of my influence, from the Thai tradition, which is very Theravadan in its origin, and its relationships between Thailand and England. It all fits in. I would not describe myself as an atheist. It's more that I choose not to constrict or restrict the definition of the spiritual aspects of human experience. Mm-hmm. We don't give it a name, right? We don't give it a form, and then we can give it a name and we can give it a form. It's not actually the problem. The problem is that when we start to identify with these forms and say, this is God, this is what God is, this is His commandments, this is how we should live, this is when the whole spiritual thing comes apart, in my opinion. So when we're talking about non-atheism, we're really talking about recognizing that we're pointing, all of these traditions are pointing at something that's beyond form, beyond the known, and we must always keep on that path, moving from one form to another form, and eventually beyond all forms.
Yeah, and the concept of attachment and non-attachment to a designation is something that's come up a great deal on the Facebook fan page recently, that we've seen an overabundance of attachment certainly in Buddhism and in other practices and in politics and all aspects of human life, that having identifications for our conventional world is fine. It's our over-attachment to those that gives them a self. That gives them an identity, which makes them that much harder to let go of.
Absolutely. And this is an area that has to be, again, as in all aspects of the spiritual path of Buddhism or any other spiritual path. These are perennial questions. You ask these every day. You wake up in the morning and you ask them. And you take it to the ultimate. You ask it every minute and every moment of your experience. What does this mean? Yes, Buddhists are not separated from, they have not overcome this problem.
Right. We're not immune. We're people too.
It is a human problem. But the interesting thing is that the Buddha recognized that, and he taught about this as being a fundamental human problem, the way we tend to attach to form. And by form, I mean anything which has a structure in time. So that could be, a ritual. It could be a dogma or a belief. It could be a thought. And of course, ultimately, it's simply the constructs of the mind itself. Whatever the mind comes up with, we have this innate tendency to identify with and say, that is real, that is the truth, that is me, that is it. And this is what the Buddha recognized as being the fundamental problem that leads to suffering and conflict of all manner.
Now, how do you see that this approach of letting go, this approach of having a conventional view of things, but not attaching too closely to it, do you find that impacting directly a mindfulness practice?
Yes, yes. Okay, let's look at the general thing. This thing about letting go. Again, this is something that must be investigated every day, every moment. What does that mean? What happens, of course, is that we start to form opinions about what it means to let go. Oh, I should let go of drinking whiskey because that's bad, because the Buddha says not to do that, or this, that, and the other. And I say, no, that is not letting go.
And that's just crazy talk, giving up whiskey. I don't know.
Or giving up, giving up meat or something, becoming a vegetarian, or giving up this, giving up that, or giving up trying to forgive everyone, and giving up anger and giving up hatred and so on. It sounds wonderful, and boy, I take my hat off to someone who can do that, but that is not the way of the Buddha, okay? It's not about giving up, because you have to ask the question always, who is it that's doing the giving up? And if you look closely into that, you're likely to see it's the same entity, the ego, that is creating the problems in the first place. And as Carl Jung said, very enlightened therapist, as you know, you cannot solve the problems of the mind on the same level that created them, the same level of consciousness that created them. So the Buddha was talking about, Buddhism says, yes, give up this, renounce that, and so on and so forth, and but the Buddha said something different than Buddhism, okay? The Buddha was saying something about, in order to let go of your attachments, your habits, all of those structures that we call sankharas that generate suffering in the mind, the only sure way to bring about their dissolution, if you like, letting go of them, is through mindfulness. And that is coming to see them directly as they are, without further reaction, without further thinking and analyzing or prejudice of any kind. Just simply learning to sit with them, to be with them in pure presence.
This sounds like this is the primary topic of your book, The Path of Mindfulness Meditation. Tell us a bit. You'd mentioned a bit about how you were writing some of these things down. What led you to finally just put it all together and write the book?
Well, I mean, mostly from working with clients and so on, the best way to learn anything in life is to teach it. I mean, I learned that as a school teacher as well, many years before that, this work. And, it just started to crystallize, and I felt like I wanted to not only put down a lot of my sort of personal ideas, but I really wanted to help people really explore mindfulness and mindfulness meditation in depth, to really look below the surface, beneath the accepted wisdom, the dogma, the usual stuff, But I was seeing it going, in my humble opinion, I was seeing things going astray, in the practice of Buddhism. It was going astray from the Dharma, the original teachings of the Buddha. So, for example, we look at this wonderful thing of mindfulness, meditation, and I find that the way it's taught over and over again is mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati. Anapanasati is a wonderful technique for developing the understanding or the depth, what mindfulness is. But it's nothing more than an exercise. It is not meant to be the path of mindfulness. That is the way that we apply mindfulness in our life for the purpose of the resolution of suffering and and for bringing out the true essence of our own self. So there are lots of questions like this, and there's the other ones, the classic ones of the understanding of anicca or impermanence, and anatta, selflessness and so on, not self. And I was saying, hold on, this is not anicca is not bad news. Everything's going to fall apart.
Right.
That's not what he was saying at all. And anatta is not about saying we don't have a self. No, that's nonsense. Of course we have a self. That's what the Buddha was talking about. And we have to work with that self, with the tool that he gave, which is mindfulness. And really mindfulness, the path of mindfulness, is really the core, the essential teachings of Buddhism, of the Buddha. This is what he was offering to us in the Four Noble Truths.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, Peter, about you see a difference between a religious path and a spiritual path. What is that?
Yeah. And again, I must always put this in perspective, because it is in no way would I put down religion or put down dogma or practices or beliefs. This is not the point of it. And again, the essential message in the whole practice of meditation is that there is no problem in content, in form. It's not the form that's the problem. It's not the objects, the thoughts, the beliefs, the practices. So by all means engage with those, fully. The issue is one thing and one thing only. Do you have freedom in how you relate to that form? Or are you operating out of sort of blind compulsion? Okay? Blind acceptance, blind following. This is the issue, and this is what the Buddha was teaching us to address very carefully in the Four Noble Truths. So, if you're able to, what I love the term to dance. If you're able to dance with the forms of religion, in the same way that you can dance with the forms of your own thoughts and memories and emotions and all the other forms that arise in the mind, then you're on the right path, and it doesn't matter what the form is. But once you begin to lose sight of the dance and become identified with the forms, then you yourself, this beautiful, beautiful, fathomless expanse of pure space and consciousness, just shrivels up and contracts down around the form. It becomes the form. And this is the central issue. This is what the Buddha described by the term tanha. It's often described as, wrongly translated as desire. And then we say, oh, the problem is I have desire and craving and so on. And that's not what he was talking about, in my opinion. What he was talking about is this addiction, this compulsion that makes us become whatever our minds generate, whether it's a belief, whether it's an emotional reaction, whether it's a thought, whatever it is, it forces us over and over again to relive that, to reincarnate into that form. And that's what, unfortunately, religion has a tendency to proliferate that tendency by proliferation of ritualized form, which it considers to be the definition of the spiritual path. It has problems because it can take us away from this freshness of mind that we must have. This joyous openness to life, to investigate it in its depth, to see what is beyond the form, what is beneath the form, and to see that there is no right answer, there is no single belief or God or anything else. There's so much more beneath it, within it. The structure of it is much more than we can know. It's a huge continuum, a process. And that's what we must try at all costs to keep in touch with, to keep fresh in our minds, to meet each moment with this freshness, this, as Suzuki Roshi so beautifully put it, the beginner's mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that open-hearted, open-minded approach, I would equate that more with, as you're describing, a spiritual path versus an attachment to an ideological stance that is constricting and tight. And I would put that in the more negative interpretation of religious, and bearing in mind, as you had said earlier, it's not to disparage any particular practice. There are those who find a religious practice in the way that we view it very liberating and opening, and really depends on where you as an individual meditator and practitioner, what resonates best with you. And I think many people who listen to this podcast in particular will resonate more with that non-tightness of dogmatic expressions and more exploratory, open, spiritual development side of things, and that way of viewing it. Tell us more about the nature and transformational effects of mindfulness.
Oh, yes.
Now we're getting into it.
Again, it's a path. It's something that we must explore every day on awakening, going to bed, and in every moment in between. It is not a technique. Okay, that's the first thing. Once it becomes reduced to a technique, we start to lose something.
And you describe that as the path of mindfulness.
That's why I call it the path of mindfulness. It is a path, and it's the traveling of the path. If you like, that's the important thing in the end. So mindfulness. Okay, let's look at this. The mindfulness, as I said, is like the workhorse of the Buddha, of the Dharma, the teachings on the path of liberation. And in Pali, it's called sati, which is an interesting word. It really has reference to the concept of remembering things. So the first part of mindfulness is this ability to basically, wake up and see what's going on, because as you know, most of the time we just go through life asleep.
Going through the motions. Yep.
Yeah, on autopilot. You've been in a traffic, driving your car, and you go through all these motions, and then suddenly you wake up literally, and you say, "Whoa, I had no memory of what I did." We get these little glimpses that somehow we're not entirely awake. Our eyes are open, but something else is not. So, mindfulness, the first function of mindfulness is to wake us up, is literally to jolt us back into the present moment of experience of what is actually there. We get lost in daydreams, we get lost in planning, we get lost in thinking, and we get lost, of course, in our emotions so easily. They arise as just objects in the mind, and we are asleep, and they just, like a sleepwalking entity, they grab us by the hand and they drag us down their path, of worrying, planning, proliferating thoughts or emotions, emotional reactions. So that's the first function. But that's, so most people get that when they start meditation, mindfulness meditation. Right, I'm supposed to sit down and I'm supposed to look at the mind like a cat waiting for the mouse to pop out of its hole. And I notice a thought arise, and that I've started to go down a path of distraction or a path of irritation or anger at someone who did something to me during the day. That, I bet I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm supposed to be mindful. So that's the first function. We call that vigilance, appamada, I think it is in Pali. Very, very important. The foundation of mindfulness. That's the beginning point. That is not the end point. And the meditators that I work with sometimes forget that, and their meditation becomes a little bit like a sort of mental ping pong. Thought has arisen. Batted away, back to the breath. And a feeling has arisen. Batted away, back to the breath. A physical sensation has arisen. I see that now, and so on. And that's important. You've got to get there in the same room as your experience, as we say in the Insight meditation tradition. Being present is really, really important. And so getting there is the first part. But it's what you do when you get there. Okay, so this emotion, an emotion has come up, I'm feeling really anxious, I'm feeling panicky, I'm feeling scared. I see it, All right, and I'm stopping.
Now what?
Yeah, now at least I'm not proliferating the worry and the thinking and all the negative stuff that comes after that makes it worse, and that creates suffering. Of course, that's the real cause of suffering, is the reactivity to the emotion. So in my book, I call that secondary reactivity. The primary reactivity is the emotion that's arisen for whatever reason that it has arisen. So we stop the secondary reactivity, and now here we are, emotion and me. The two of us, twiddling our thumbs, what do we do next? That's when we cultivate the second part of mindfulness, which is called sampajanya, sati sampajanya. And this means, it's often translated as clear comprehension, but really what it means is seeing things exactly as they are, without reaction, without preference, without saying, that's not important, this isn't, I should be doing something more important, It's about really honoring what is there, what has arisen, and greeting it and welcoming it. So sati sampajanya is the second phase, if you like, of the mindfulness response that we make, each second that we encounter something with mindfulness during meditation. So that's establishing the relationship. And then the third part of what mindfulness is, that is as a path, is called satipanya. Panya is usually described as wisdom, but it's better described as intelligence. Wisdom intelligence is the natural wisdom intelligence that arises through clear seeing of things as they are. You see, so there's a progression here. Mindfulness, sati, leads to sati sampajanya, which then leads to satipanya. And satipanya then becomes the foundation for right action, for skillful action that leads to the resolution of suffering and, compassion and the generation of a meaningful and spiritual life. So sometimes I describe these as the 3 R's, okay? The 3 R's of mindfulness. The first one is recognition, right? The second one is relationship, the most important part of mindfulness, the part that gets forgotten. The third part is the third R is resolution. So recognition, relationship, and resolution. Resolution is the process through which a phenomenon completes its dance. What is that dance? The dance is a phenomenon arises, a phenomenon exists, a phenomenon passes away. That's it. For a simple thought, or take for example, mindfulness of a sound, or a bell, beautiful thing to hit a bell and then listen to it. The sound arises, it exists, and it passes away. Being mindful means that you are able to sit with it and experience each part of its life cycle from birth to death, the whole thing. Now, when we come to the mind and then the mind generates an emotion, anxiety, what do? Well, there are some schools that say you label it. Oh, it's an emotion. Back to the breath. Let it go. In the Theravadan tradition that I kind of get my inspiration from, no, we don't do that. If there's an emotion that arises, we sit with the emotion as we would sit with a friend. We don't, a friend comes to the door, you greet them, great, that's nice, you said hello to them, but you don't just turn your back on them and then walk away again, right? Which can be the way that mindfulness meditation can be practiced. You just label it and then you go back to the breath or some other concept of what you should be meditating on. In Vipassana meditation, which is what we're describing here, we choose to meditate on what arises in the mind, very, very closely, looking at it, establishing a relationship with it, watching for its changes, allowing it to change. And that is what we call the awakening to anicca, allowing things to change, to go through their dance. And all phenomena will do that if, and this is the big if they are allowed the freedom to change.
Right. Change is a critical component to that, because if there is, the unchanging doesn't allow for that arising and falling. It must be part of it, is an inescapable part of how this works.
Yes. And the environment, the space that allows change to happen in this intelligent way that we're talking about here, is the space of mindfulness, engaged presence. This is how I define mindfulness. It's not just, oh, there's a thought, oh, there's a memory, oh, that can calm the mind. That's more the
thought labeling has its place as serving a particular function, but it's not the whole of the path, and that's what you're describing is something that you practice, and it has particular parts that you wind and go through, and as you describe it quite eloquently, as a dance, and that you must allow this to go through its motions and observe it, not attaching to it, not controlling it. And that is part of that practice. And you also, one of the things I wanted to mention is that you had made a distinction in our emails back and forth before the interviews between types of meditation, samatha and vipassana. And to me that was particularly delightful because I don't get to discuss that very much. It doesn't come up a lot. And it's one of the things where those who have some background study or meditation themselves may be familiar with this. But if you ask 5 people who are experienced with it and have some idea, how would you distinguish them? You'll get 10 different answers out of those 5 people. So I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how you distinguish and how you would describe and honor the samatha and vipassana practices of meditation.
Yes. This is another perennial discussion within the book.
I try to come up with interesting questions.
Oh, dearie me. Yes. And of course, we must honor all traditions and use them wisely and skillfully, not in any way create any kind of, this or that or, kind of thing. Samatha for me really describes what we might call a more traditional form of meditation that most of us are kind of aware of. Things like TM could be described as a form of samatha meditation. Breathing meditation, anapanasati, that is awareness of the rising and falling of breathing, is a form of samatha meditation. Meditating on a color or a flame or a crystal or a religious phrase that has inspirational meaning for you. These are all examples where you're making the primary object, and all meditation, first of all, backing up a bit, what is meditation? Meditation is the focused application of conscious awareness on an object. Okay. So in the samatha meditation, you choose, if you like, an external object, and you focus your awareness on that, and you look very closely using the first part of mindfulness for anything that takes you away from that awareness, so that you can skillfully bring your mind back to the awareness on the object. Now, the benefits of this is in generating what we call samadhi, the general stability of mind. So they're very good exercises, and they can lead to a profound depth of experience of a deeper quality of strength, if you like, inner strength and calmness than we would get, running around like rabbits in our everyday life. So very, very powerful and useful to use. Vipassana, on the other hand, is an attempt to look actually at what is happening, what is arising in the mind, in our experience. Same thing. Moment-to-moment experience. What is actually arising? Samatha is like taking a vacation from the mind. Vipassana is diving into the mind. And that's really where the word vipassana kind of comes from. V means to look in depth, to really, really look in depth. Pas is from the roots meaning to see.
To see, passati, yep.
Yeah, passati. And na, of course, is knowledge. It's kind of experiential knowing. So it's often translated as insight meditation, as opposed to samatha, which is usually described as calming meditation or tranquility meditation or something like that. So Vipassana is a bit of a dilemma for most Westerners, and because it's like, you're saying you want me to look at all that stuff? And that's, one of the bylines of my book, working with the chaos of the mind. Yes, and that is the path of Vipassana. It is to dive in there and look at the chaos of the mind, but with your golden sword of mindfulness, which makes all the difference. Because,
it's good that that's to me one of the things I've found most interesting is that there's been a great deal of discussion. I've even heard of this from some monastics saying that, really you don't need to do samatha. You just vipassana. That's where it's at. Just do that. And as I look at the Eightfold Path, it's it's not the Sevenfold Path. It's the Eightfold Path, and our final parts of that, 7 and 8, are jhana practice, and they're saying you don't really need to do that kind of thing. You don't need to worry about that single point of concentration stuff. That's okay. And to me, if you're not bringing in that practice of that focus, and honestly, that joy, that piti that can arise in that, you may have a great filter with vipassana, with your mindfulness. You may have a terrific filter that is not being approached with a joyous heart, and that changes completely the tone of what one observes in that moment by moment meditation.
And it's a very difficult. I mean, that's very well put. I think samadhi is a very important component of the awakening process, or the spiritual path, if you like, and that's why it's placed in so prominently in the 7 factors of enlightenment or awakening that the Buddha described, which is a beautiful set of, if you like, components or stages that we should be going through, if you like, not just in one's life, so that by age 34, okay, that's the stage. No, it's in each moment of mindfulness.
Right. Now tell us a little bit about your formal sitting and informal mini meditations.
Ah, yes, mini meds. Mindfulness as a path means that your if you like, your goal, and we like goals in Buddhism. We don't say they're wrong. Okay, we love our goals. We have passion for them. All these good things. And our goal, of course, is to be able to generate mindfulness throughout the day, moment to moment, so that we bring wisdom, intelligence into all of our actions. So we act wisely, that we don't act out of habit and reactivity and, and all of the usual things that catch us out off guard and cause us to act skillfully and cause harm. So that's the ultimate goal. Never forget that. So meditation must not be separated from daily life. Daily life has to become the meditation. So how do we approach that? Well, there's three practices really within mindfulness meditation. There's what I call moment to moment or real time meditation, which can be approached in many, many different ways. But primarily the focus is, again, resolution of suffering. So we train ourselves to watch very closely for the arising of anger, disappointment, irritation, frustration, stress, anxiety, all of these emotional reactions that are our habitual self. So we learn to be vigilant, okay. When we notice these arising during the day, we respond to them, and this is the difference. We're trying to move away from reacting to them with, go away, I want to be a pure person. I want to be a nice, compassionate Buddhist, not an awful, person like I am. No, we're not engaging in that. That's nonsense. What we're saying is, how do I approach these suffering, the suffering that arises in the day? And the approach is the approach of mindfulness, which is completely the same as the approach of the four Brahma Viharas, the compassionate abodes. Friendliness, metta, compassion, karuna, appreciation of the good stuff, mudita, and equanimity, balanced awareness, upekkha. That is mindfulness. That is what we are supposed to be cultivating throughout the day towards ourselves, towards our suffering, towards the suffering that we encounter in other people and in the world at large. In our physical worlds. That's how we greet it. Thich Nhat Hanh, this wonderful Vietnamese teacher and monk, talks about this beautifully in the sense of, I walk through life and I smile at each experience, each thing that arises in my consciousness, suffering included. Okay, so it's this quality of kindness towards what is, and but you've got to first of all become aware that something has arisen.
You got to notice it. If you don't notice it, you can't smile at it.
So that's the first part of mindfulness, and then we respond in the relationship of kindness and compassion, which is the relationship part that we were talking about earlier. So we can do that all through the day, watching for our own suffering, watching for what arises during our conversations with our loved ones and family, and with when difficulties arise, when conflict arises, watching, choosing. This is the other part of mindfulness, the path of Dharma, is I'm going to choose to, be in charge of my life. I choose to engage with what happens.
Yep.
Rather just be the victim.
Yeah, I finish up every episode with every moment you choose.
Choose.
That's the beauty of this, but we need to create the elbow room, the space, with our mindfulness practice, and it's not a perfect, it's a practice.
Yeah.
To create that space so that we have that moment to make that choice and make a better one, make one more mindfully with greater awareness of, okay, I could do this, but if I do, I know that's maybe not the best option. I know that my end goal is going to, that is a direction of harmfulness.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. Thank God, if I can say that, is that the actual process of what I call resolution, that is coming to the best conclusion and the best action in a given situation, is actually the easy part. If you lay down the foundations of this spacious awareness, mindfulness, presence, engaged presence, the rest takes care of itself quite easily. So you know that you're in an argument with your loved one, and there you are going at it, and you're about to say something really, really bad. It's, going to cause a lot of chaos, and you just catch yourself just for that moment, and you say, "Ooh, don't think I'm."
Maybe not. Maybe I'll say that other thing.
That's mindfulness. That's mindfulness. That's what, if you like, the one mindfulness shining through a little bit. You take a little pause, take a deep breath, and a better quality action arises.
Right, and one of the reasons I liked you brought up the Brahma Viharas, and so the divine abodes of loving kindness and compassion and altruistic joy and equanimity, is that when we talk about this choice and focusing on this moment where we give ourselves a little bit of room and spaciousness in this present moment to choose better, we don't always mean in terms of actions and words. We also mean in terms of just our attitude and what we bring to the table, and that in itself can be amazingly transformative and is extremely beneficial, I find it, prior to some future point where we will have the opportunity to actually engage. Where I use this as an example sometimes as you're in a stressful situation at work, and there's a meeting next week and you're not looking forward to it because there's something going on there. By choosing this and using these mini meds and in your regular formal setting, and you're bringing that spaciousness moment by moment, and you've got that as a practice so that it's something you're doing more, you can turn your mind and your attitude and the openness of your heart around. If you're practicing that for a bit, and by the time you get to that event, that meeting, that whatever it is that has been a weight on you, that you find your ability to have spaciousness and make better choices, in particular with words, because they're so easy to go drastically to the left instead of the right, you find that you're in a better place to guide those to where you would rather they went.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so counterintuitive to the way we are taught. Here in the West, as we often say that, and it's supposed to be by implication different in the East, but I don't think so. This is a human problem again. It affects all of us. That we are taught that, the only thing that matters is what you do. Doing matters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, quote unquote, the Eastern tradition is saying, but there must be doing with being. We have to have the two together. And I firmly believe this, as I think you're saying here, is that we have to establish this quality of being, first of all, in each moment, not as a sort of spiritual, metaphysical thing. I mean, being present, really, 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 100% right there, present, engaged with presence of mind. That's being. And out of that, the quality of the doing is purified. And Buddha talked about this many, many times, the purification of our action, the karma.
And that's based in what we bring to the table. Now, something you had brought up that you wanted us to talk about here, I think touches in very beautifully with what we've been discussing, is working with emotions. And with your work as a psychotherapist, and I've noticed on your website, which is www.mindfulnessmeditationtherapy.com, you talk a bit about this. So could you go into working with emotions and kind of how that works in both generally and how you work on that with your clients?
Yeah, certainly. Mindfulness meditation therapy is a system, as I said, that sort of evolved out of my early work in the 1980s when I first came to Boulder. And it has a specific meaning because, okay, we have this thing, mindfulness meditation, we're learning about that. We meditate on breathing or on loving kindness or metta meditations and all this kind of thing, which is lovely. But over there on the sideline are all these pesky emotions. And my fundamental, I'm a scientist as well. I have a background in medical science. And, I say, well, okay, what's my problem? I don't have a problem with breathing. I do have a problem with emotions. Why am I meditating on breathing? I should be meditating on my emotions, put it in a sort of simplistic form. And that's really what mindfulness meditation therapy is. We make the emotion the center stage, the object, the primary object of our meditation with mindfulness. So basically in mindfulness therapy, as I teach it and use with my clients and students, they come to me and they say, I have this terrible anxiety, social anxiety, or sometimes agoraphobia, or depression, or fear, or you name them. they come to me with these things. My first question to them is, oh, that's interesting. How do you know you have that feeling? You say you're anxious. What does that mean, you're anxious?
Yes. Yes, let's analyze. Please define your anxiousness.
Yeah. What do you mean? I'm anxious, The problem that 99.99% of people that come to me have is that they become so identified with the labels, I am anxious, I am depressed, I am afraid, that it stops them from looking at the reality of what is there. Okay. They get hung up on the labels. They get hung up on an abstract level of experience, which is what something like I am anxious is. It's a concept. It's a label. It's not real. It's in the Buddhist language, it's an illusion. And the attachment, if you like, or identification with these illusions is the real issue. It's the path of healing begins when we begin to say, I am not the emotion. I am not the thought. I am not the memory. These are contents that arise in my mind. What I am, well, we'll put that on the side. That's a bit...
It's a bigger question, yeah.
So leave the I out of it and just look at what is this thing you call anxiety. And then so people, when they start to focus with mindfulness, which means they have an open mind and are looking and investigating very closely, they begin to see, oh, there's a certain physical sensation in my stomach or my chest or my throat or my head. So there's some, this thing I call anxiety has a physical component. They look closer at the physical components and their general awareness or sense of the anxiety, and they say it has color. Oh, that's interesting. I've never seen that before. It's kind of red. Oh, what's so surprising about that? We say, I'm green with jealousy, red with anger. I mean, it's in our language. This is beginning to get to the structure of your emotion. That is, what is actually there. So you maybe notice color, you maybe notice form. And that gets to be really interesting. So this is one of the things I noticed in my work in the 80s, was that people were very able to contact what we call experiential imagery. This is imagery that arises from their experience, from their emotions. Color, form, sometimes very dreamlike forms, very symbolic shapes and things. The forms often have movement associated with them. They may be swirling around, If someone is feeling very stressed, you can bet that their inner imagery will be moving a lot. You're feeling stressed. And so on. So here we're beginning to get moved down from the abstract level to a much more concrete level of what is actually there in the structure of their emotion. And in this movement from the abstract to the concrete, we're moving from a very, what I call a sensory impoverished realm, which is the abstract concepts and so on. I mean, there's nothing there, to something that's very rich indeed and very meaningful for the client. So when they see these colors, you can start to think, well, what shall I do with them? You can begin to investigate with the other properties of mindfulness, such as compassion and kindness and friendliness. And you begin to kind of investigate what needs to happen here, what needs to change. You don't go in there and try and change things, on a conceptual level. You allow the change to arise itself. And so clients often find that maybe they find a part of themselves that's very sad and very alone, and maybe they get an image as an example of, some small black object, or if you like a child, they see an inner child. Whatever it is that fits their emotion, they can relate to. And that's the beginning of a powerful process of change. You begin to say, how can I help? What do you need? And you bring things to it, not at a conceptual level, but at a sensory level. So if it's black and if it's cold and it's feeling alone, then you might want to bring a light color to it, like yellow or white, and so on. And so you start to work in very skillful ways with the actual inner structure of your emotions. Yeah.
Now, one of the reflexes in my own mind in hearing this that I've had to let go of, because I've noticed this coming up in my own reaction to it, when we describe things like this, I tend to have the thought, well, these are proliferations. This isn't how it is. It's rooted differently than that. And a recent discussion with a friend of mine who is a person who has Asperger's syndrome, we were talking through a basic meditation, and he was new to this practice, and I was describing the verbal movie that's going on, that constant running track. And he said, no, that's not a problem. I don't hear that. For me, it's images. What you see, what you have in your head as words, on mine is very different. It is a constant moving collage of visual imagery. So, Peter, as you're describing things with the colors and forms, like, all of these apply, and it's not necessarily a proliferation in something that has been added on to and built upon. That may be a starting point. That may be the root of what is arising, because we're all wired a little bit differently. We all have different ways of how we interact with the world. And for me, it's verbal, and for a lot of people, that's it. That we do identify the words that are coming up, and that's the part that we need to let go. But for others, it may be more visual. It may be more auditory or olfactory, or whatever it is within the senses that they have. It's not necessarily proliferation. Maybe the base.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in my experience, I would more and more convinced that imagery, pictures, this is the natural language of the mind, of the psyche, not the ego, but the larger mind, the bigger mind, the totality of mind we can call the psyche. The ego tends to work in linguistic structures, concepts, thoughts, and the sankharas. But the psyche tends to work more in pictures, and this is why, we have dreams and the like. The pictures carry tremendous amounts of energy. We say that the emotional energy, what's called Vedana in Buddhism, is encoded in the imagery. So for example, if someone has a phobia of a spider, they're probably going to see a very large internal image of a spider, with probably very vivid, bright colors and very close up. That is the structure that contains the emotional energy, the Vedana of fear, of suffering for them. So, it's not the words that actually encode emotion. It's the visual imagery inside, beneath the words, that encodes the emotion. And one of the sort of concepts behind mindfulness therapy and experiential therapy in general is that once you get down to this really detailed structural level, once you start to facilitate changes in the structure of the imagery, or auditory things, as you say, or physical aspects as well of the emotion, then the emotion changes. Because your work is like, the analogy is, okay, my car doesn't work. I can sit and yell at it, like John Cleese would do in his funny movie, where his mini car doesn't start, so he hits it with a tree.
John Cleese and
John Cleese.
Faulty Towers. I was thinking of that exact moment. I'm going to give you a damn good thrashing. Right, that's it. Don't say I didn't warn you. And he runs off camera, and then he comes back with a big shrubbery and starts hitting the car. Wonderful scene.
Oh, that's very good. Very good.
I was raised with brothers. We reenacted those all the time.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what the ego does, it has these very clumsy tools to work with, ideas, beliefs, concepts. They just don't quite get to the root of the problem, so to speak. And now imagine the other situation of an enlightened Buddhist monk, okay? He comes along and he opens up the hood of the car and he says, you've got to look inside and see what's there. Okay, so at any rate, so this person, otherwise known as a garage mechanic, opens up the hood, and this is very interesting, this moment here, and I want you to try and kind of get the flavor for this. His primary action, if you like, or relationship here, is that he looks with an open mind at what's, in the engine. He looks at all the parts of the engine, the wires and everything else. In that process of looking, of awareness, mindfulness, he notices one of the spark plug wires is loose. Okay. He says, I should put the spark plug wire back on. Now I try it and it starts up. All right, he said. So when you look at that, what was the most powerful action that led to the resolution of the suffering of the car? It was the awareness itself.
Yeah, stopping and taking the moment.
Yeah. The solution is not a problem. It arose directly through the awareness. And this is what we're cultivating all the time with mindfulness. Choosing not to react by hitting it with shrubbery, as you put it, but to sit with it, which is what the garage mechanic is doing. He's sitting there, silent, quiet, mind open, mouth shut, taking in, investigating the structure of what is there. He's meditating. He's meditating. And lo and behold, the solutions begin to pop up. And this is what happens when people start to look below or beneath the hood of their emotions, the depression, their anxiety, the stress, into the inner structure, the engine. The solutions begin to show themselves. That is, what I mean by solutions, though, is not ideas. It's movements in sensory content, like shifting colors, or one part needing something from another part of the mind. Things sort of realigning and readjusting and resynthesizing themselves. And it's quite amazing to watch. I mean, as a mindfulness therapist, I do very little. I just get my clients into this place where they're really looking at the structure of their experience, and the rest kind of unfolds by itself. It's quite remarkable to watch. So that's the kind of approach that where we can apply mindfulness. And this is another important thing. Mindfulness is meant to be applied.
Yeah, it's not just for the cushion. It's where does the rubber hit the road? It's taking it off the cushion into your daily life, moment by moment.
Exactly. Into your daily life. And this brings in another thing which I feel is a hang up. So much of the time we think mindfulness is just about meditating on the present moment. We get this an awful lot, okay? There's a little bit of a problem with this. Yes, it's true in one sense. You are interested in what is the actual structure of what it is you're looking at. Like, anxiety, I am anxious, is not the structure of what I am looking at. That is a label. All physical sensations and images and sounds and memories and other thoughts and all that. That's the structure underneath the label. So what was I saying? I've forgotten. But in any case, so when we,
the mindfulness isn't just a present moment. There's more to it than that.
That's right, it is. So I look at it like this. The mindfulness, you're creating a kind of a space, a stage, in which you can invite things. Okay? You can invite what you're feeling right now in the present. I'm feeling tense. Right. Welcome, tension. Take your place in this space of awareness, in the stage, the screen, if you like, movie screen. I choose to sit with you. I choose to be present with you. Okay, with the basic compassionate aspect of mindfulness. But you can also say, look into your past. Yesterday I had this terrible row with my wife. Okay. It left me feeling really hurt. Right. That is the subject you should bring into your meditation and make a primary object in your Vipassana meditation. I choose to sit with that emotion that arose yesterday, the past. And the same for the future. I am worried about my job interview. Best way to prepare for your job interview is to meditate on the anxiety about your job interview.
Yeah.
Not meditating on breathing, okay? The problem is the job interview. So breathing, that's a nice exercise. It's a good preparation for the Vipassana. But the real Vipassana work, in my humble opinion, is to engage dukkha wherever it is to bring dukkha in. It's to be like a warrior. And this is brought out nicely in the Tibetan traditions. It's got this courageous aspect to it, also described by the Buddha in the sevenfold path of awakening, the seven factors, is virya, quality of virya. Virya is a fascinating word. It comes from the same root as virility, as vigor. It has this kind of quality of heroic energy. This.
Right. It's more than just energy, as it is frequently translated as just energy. There's more to it than that.
Oh, absolutely. Much more. It's not just energy. It's this kind of tremendous, powerful energy, like the lion's roar. The lion. This wonderful symbol of the Buddhist path. And so we as warriors, we don't just sit there like chickens on our cushion and wait for suffering to hit us on the head. Okay, we go out there and we encounter it on the field. I wouldn't say encounter it on the field of battle, because we're Buddhists. We encounter it on the field of mindfulness. So we invite in our suffering into our meditation and make it a primary object. So that's one aspect. We need to broaden our meditation, not just make it a relaxation exercise and escape from reality.
Yeah, I think that's one of the wonderful advantages of having a developed mind that allows us to look into past and plan future events, is that we're not just limited by one of the things we want to make sure is that present moment and creating that spaciousness to make better choices. Absolutely, that's key in what we're doing. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you can't contemplate mindfully something that you knew didn't go quite as you wanted to, and being able to take a closer look at that. Find out what went wrong, so that when you do encounter a similar situation or that person or those feelings, whatever it is that's coming up, you have a better, more thoughtful way of handling creating that moment in that present moment when that arises.
exactly. And, you know, the discourses on mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutta, are full of these kind of contemplations. And sometimes it kind of gets forgotten. I mean, you know, in the first of the foundations, the Kayanupassana, the contemplation of body, you know, there's talk of contemplation of the parts of the body and the contemplation of the death of the body, so it's dying and the corpses and so on. And people forget what are we really trying to do here? You know,
corpse meditation isn't merely about the inevitability of the termination of your life. It's not simply about impermanence. It's also about you being able to look to a future point. So you're not just nailed down to this moment. You're only existing in this moment. That's true, but you're able to think ahead. And that's part of what comes into, in particular, I'm glad you brought up the corpse meditation, is that we often get hooked on that as this is how you develop a non-attachment to the body. And that's true. That's very true. It does help with that. But part of that process is you're placing yourself in a future event. And that has value. We should always remember that our contemplations can provide us a route to release suffering when we look at things from the past and contemplate things from the future.
Yes, I mean, and I think this is, you know, and especially in the Thai tradition, they have this tremendously sort of superstitious side to the culture, and they get terribly afraid of spirits and ghosts and things like this. It's very interesting. And so the corpse meditations, you know, have great meaning for the Thai culture. But the purpose of it is what I'm trying to get at here. The real purpose is you're putting yourself in a situation or contemplation where you're choosing to encounter your suffering, your fears, your fear of dying, your fear of getting sick, your fear of getting old and, you know, not being beautiful anymore. You know, it's about actually, if you like, deliberately trying to stir up these things so that you can develop equanimity towards these inevitable parts of living. These are going to happen. You know, basically the Buddha is saying, this is going to happen. You're going to get sick. You're going to get old and you're going to die. Get used to it. You know? And getting used to it is contemplation. This is done by, you know, not just avoiding it, not just pretending it won't happen, which is what we're very good at here, you know, in America, but by going out there and finding it and encountering it.
Yes.
We're on the mindfulness field, I should say. And so, you know, it starts to put a different perspective on it when you look at it in this way, you know, being the one who is choosing, who's making the choice. Now, this is an interesting area too. Let me talk about that. You know, as you know, the term Buddha means the one who is awakened, the awakened one. Another way of looking at that, synonymous with awakening, is the one who is free. He is free. Free from what? Free from the compulsive identification with form, with objects, you know, the emotions, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, memories, all the other things that arise. Freedom is what we're talking about. This is the real, if you like, essence of what the Buddha is teaching, what he wants us to develop in ourselves and cultivate is freedom from the known, as Krishnamurti put it so beautifully. Freedom, not abandonment of the known, not getting rid of it, not, you know, anything like that at all. Problem is never in the form itself, it's in our relationship. So freedom. This implies choice. Freedom and choice go together. That we have the freedom to choose, really choose, not at this sort of ego level, but from the depth of our being, intuitively, creatively, with our whole being, choose how to live our lives. This is living the authentic life. This is what he has for us as our path, as our goal, is to try and learn how to become our real self, not the contents of ourself, but the awakened one, the one who knows the contents.
And that's the entire point of our practice. And Peter, this has been a wonderful conversation. Folks listening to the podcast, I'd just like to remind you there is, of course, a webpage for this episode. And the website for Dr. Peter Strong is www.mindfulnessmeditationtherapy.com. The book is The Path of Mindfulness Meditation. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.